Okay, well, I want to welcome everyone today to WPLN's Leadership Spotlight. Today we have such a fabulous program. We have Judge Cassandra Kirk joining us, and we'll get to her in just a moment. But just to let everyone know, this is a monthly series that we do at WPLN to highlight women leaders of different backgrounds and different industries that are really doing the tough work and paving the way for all of those coming up behind them. And so, with that, I have I'm just so honored and so excited to have Judge Kirk with us today. She is the Fulton County Magistrate Chief Judge for the court in Georgia. And yeah, so with that, before we get into some questions, if you wouldn't mind just giving a little brief backgrounder on you, that would be fabulous because I'm sure you could do a better job than me reading off of it. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. When people ask me to describe who I am, I generally say that I'm Georgia born and Mississippi bred, and at my core, I'm curiosity led. My parents are from Mississippi. I have been in Georgia my whole life. I can say that thanks to an appointment by Governor Nathan Deal and 2 elections, I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Chief Magistrate Judge for the busiest magistrate court in the state of Georgia. We handle about 80,000 cases each year. I can tell you that our court is relatively young. It's less than 10 years old in this form. And I am very proud of the way that we have optimized our processes, our case clearance, and we have created accessibility for those people that come into our court so that we are actually able to connect our court to our community. One of the things that I have been doing in preparation for being before you all today is listening to some of the master classes so I can see if there's something that I need to know or need to share. And one of the ones I listened to was with Elaine Westeroth, and she mentioned about superpowers, like those things that make you stand out from the crowd. And I would say that throughout my career, I have had two. The first of those is the ability to see people. And the second is the ability to see solutions in broken systems. And that alone, those two things alone, have given me the opportunity to shape this court, our magistrate court here in Fulton County. That means its policies, the judges that sit here. I've appointed about 45 judges over this period of time, like I said, about 10 years. And it really is amazing to form this team in order to do the really hard work that we have to do. So I'm really proud of the court that we've shaped. And our goal is to focus on empowering, engaging, and informing our community. So I'm excited to spend some time with you all today. And that's just kind of a brief.
Yeah. No, I think having that leadership philosophy is so important when you go into these positions, especially as you grow in the position, to have something to kind of frame how you continue to do your job, because there's of course the day-to-day, but then there's the way that you do it, the way you interact with people. And so that's great to get that primer. And I love what you said. I was taking notes. But so on this program, we want to explore a little bit about, how you got into this position, what helped you prepare and get you there. Obviously, a legal background is required, but there's so many other pieces that go into it. So if you could just share a little bit about that journey, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. So I began it's about 28, 29 years now, my legal career as a labor and employment associate at a management side firm, Stokes and Murphy. And then from there, I was a prosecutor in Newton and Fulton counties. Those are two counties here in Georgia, one relatively big, and then the other kind of a small to medium-sized firm county. I was also a criminal defense attorney. I've been a special assistant attorney general, which means I worked for DFACS. I have also served as a child advocate attorney, a supervisor, and interim director there. I've been the director of legal services for the Georgia Merit System. I've been a court administrator, and now I am embracing 13 years as a judge. I was first a judge in the juvenile court as an associate judge, and there I had the pleasure of spearheading the Fulton County's first juvenile drug court. And that was selected to participate in a nationwide learning collaborative. And then now I get to serve as chief judge of our magistrate court here. And again, you already know that it's about putting people first, and that has required substantial changes in how we function. So that's a little
Wow.
bit about it.
Just a few positions, just a few things that got you there.
Just a little.
That's so incredible. It's such an incredible journey and so much just interesting experience. So when talking about, leadership and leaders, what skills do you think are absolutely crucial, non-negotiable to help again kind of guide how you do the work that you do?
I would say courage and vision. So,
Mm,
as a leader in this space, you have to be able to figure out what this is. We at this court had the joy of being like brand new. So 2013, 2014, local legislation passed that created this court. And that was, what does that court look like? Because that was basically the people at the Capitol saying, go create a court. That was not funding, that was not staff, that was not anything. And so that gave me the opportunity to figure out what a vision for a court was. And so I knew, having had all of these roles in court, that court should really be accessible. We do really important work in court. For
mhm.
people not to be able to know how to navigate that just seems really unfair. It's like you almost win because you've got the secret sauce. I wanted to open that door so that everyone had the opportunity to do that. And then the other thing is the courage to actually do that. So not just having a vision, but being able to go before the Board of Commission and ask and seek for the funding that you need in order to sit amongst all these other elected officials, community leaders, and make sure that you are presenting the best of what the court has, or at least saying, hey, this is what we don't have. Help me get that. So for me, what I realized is, when I was a juvenile court judge, that's where I learned to be a judge. So I didn't learn to be a judge as the chief judge. I learned to be a judge somewhere else. That taught me how it is that I need to prepare every day, like how I need to do the research for my cases, how cases should flow. All of that helped me when I came over here for this role to be chief judge. The other thing is not just utilizing those hard skills, but sometimes those soft skills. So some of the things that I did not know that I had to learn was a little bit of a HR background from a different viewpoint. When you are the employment counsel, that's not the same as actually having to do employment decisions. And so there are different conversations that you have to have and ways that you have to have them in order to support your team, but also make sure that the staff is doing exactly like what your vision of how the court should run. The other thing, I know that having been a judge down in juvenile court, I got the opportunity to learn about the accountability courts. And so, having started two accountability courts, the one down in juvenile court, and then we revamped, we being the state court judge, Patsy Porter, Solicitor General Keith Gamage, a lot of other people on the behavioral health team, revamped what that had been a treatment diversion court into a misdemeanor mental health court that allowed people to enter in two tracks. But so just having those accountability skills, being able to learn, like, so I am a lifelong learner. That is one of the things that anyone that knows me is basically like, what class are you taking now? Right. So if it's not master class or edX, there is something
Mhm.
that I am taking to get me trained to the next level. So I am always training, but learning the procurement, learning the budget, learning those other things, those are necessary, but I think courage and vision to be able to live out. And for me, I am a person of faith, so it is really living out what God has purposed for me to do. So
Interesting. Yeah. No, those are excellent points. And it's interesting. Well, I should just note that I also watch Masterclass.
yeah,
So I also enjoy it. I like learning things that I have actually no idea about, like music, all the things. But so I appreciate the learning piece. But you also mentioned several elected positions that a lot of people, when they think about public service, especially the women that are watching and go through our programs, they think that they have to run for office in order to be a public leader, but there's obviously so many different ways to serve. And obviously what you do is part of that service, the public service, even though it may not seem like it, because when people think public service, they think elected or like appointed to a commission that you mentioned. But what you're doing is serving the community. You are beholden to the community and even what drives you. So I guess all this to say is I'm curious, what was there some moment that happened in your career, or has it always just been inherent that you wanted to serve the public more than just being at a law firm and kind of doing the billable hours piece of things, but actually be this, you know, um, being the face for people to see and especially on the accessibility pieces that you just mentioned.
And so it's funny because I have done the law firm. When I first came out of law school, that's exactly what I did, was the law firm for about 2.5 years. And it was rewarding work, and it was obviously work where we were paid well. And for me, I knew that I had watched my grandparents serve, I had watched my parents serve. And then even as a young child, I had paged down at the Senate. My next door neighbor, I was fortunate that my next door neighbor went from being a state rep to being a state senator. So there were years that my sister and I got to go page down at the Senate. And so seeing just that legislative process, I know anyone that kind of knew me would have thought that I would have run for a House seat or a state Senate seat. And for some reason, this is God's place. And so I have to run for, not have to, but I choose to run for this judicial seat. But for me,
Mhm.
it's something that I have seen. I've obviously helped on campaigns as a youth. And then as I became an adult, I knew that this was one way for me to stay connected to the community, but also to be accountable for what I
Mm.
believe God has given me. I believe that I've been given a lot and a lot is required of me. This is part of what I can do for that.
That's so just it's so nice to hear. We'll put it that way. It's just, again, I feel like so many women out there, I mean, it is a calling, and so we're grateful that you're serving. And speaking of the women out there, so WPLN is creating this community, network of women, not just leaders, but women that want to be involved with their community, that see the value of having our perspectives at the table, at all different tables. So, were there women that come to mind that really helped you on your journey, or that really served as a mentor that you can kind of provide that experience, and how important that was for you?
Yes, absolutely. So I would be remiss if I didn't say my mother and father, right? I know my dad's not a
Yeah.
woman, but
No,
it
it's okay. Yeah.
but I would say that there is a role for the there's a role for my dad, right? So he is not just my father, he was my protector. He was the person that opened doors for me. And I think if I say that no men open doors for me, that would be incorrect and unfair. So even him being in the room with me while introducing me to other men was useful, and I right was useful. There were people that would protect me because of him that would not necessarily do that had I simply introduced them. And so I have a story that we can talk about later if it comes up. But I do want to say yes, yes, yes. I want to say Marjorie Young, who gave me a job when I was, and so I know her through sorority connections. I served as her parliamentarian in our graduate chapter as a sorority when I came out of being a lawyer. I had a job. She offered me a job as her director of legal services at the Georgia Merit System. So, yes, I would say Marjorie Young. And when this job came open, I would say that Lynn Riley was someone that has not just
Mhm.
necessarily said, hey, are you interested in positions? But she has also said, there are these other leadership programs. I have nominated you for one. I
Yeah.
encourage you strongly to complete the application. And so
Yeah.
Lynn has been a friend and has been a confidant and someone I can rely on as I am seeking other information, other positions. And so I appreciate her not just opening up the door for employment, but also opening up the door for that social interaction. I've got a couple of other women that have opened up the door for social interactions, and that would be Sheila Weidman Farley, as well as Kathy Colbinson. And then the first person to appoint me a judge was also a woman, and that was Judge Belinda Edwards down in juvenile court. So I've had a lot of women that have paved the way for me, and they've not just simply opened the door and pushed me in, but they have really opened the door and said, let me show you how this process works. Let me show you when someone says, this is the information I want, how to give it to that particular person. So I am very grateful to have had mentors and women in leadership who have, basically stood in the gap and pushed me forward. And obviously there is Judge Penny Brown Reynolds, who has also helped me prepare for interviews and just kind of help make sure that my legal thinking is correct. So
I mean, that's great. There's so many amazing names in there. And,
yeah.
I think one of the themes that I was hearing, even when you're talking about your dad, is thinking of you when these positions came up or when these opportunities came up. And I think that's something that it's hard to know how to be in the right place at the right time or to find people that are willing to do that. So if you could give some advice to folks that are listening to how to either build those relationships or find people that are willing to keep them top of mind for these type of opportunities.
Right. And so what I'm finding is that it really is about the relationship. It's not
Mm,
running through those networking events and just kind of treating them like it's a buffet. It is sitting and picking maybe
yeah.
two people at the event that you really want to get to know. And after you've met them at the event, maybe send a note that says, "Hi, I really enjoyed speaking with you. May I speak with you further?" One of the ladies I mentioned was Sheila Weidman Farley. I mentioned to her that I was interested in interviewing for this position. She immediately, like within 2 weeks, had a person on her team sit down with me and was kind of like, he was another high level report as she was, and basically was like, "Look, this is my friend, talk." And so it takes more than just simply those drive through networking experiences that we've kind of been taught. It
Yeah.
really takes time to build those relationships because that's how people know jobs are open. That's how people know who they're looking for. And particularly in the political context, it is those people in those arenas that will have the leg up for the next appointment, for the next position, even for boards and things. It is
Yeah.
those connections.
Yeah. Yeah, building those authentic relationships. It's hard and it takes time. It does take time. Um, so, for a lot of folks in a lot of positions that are out there, they're part-time or they're something additional. They're not necessarily going to be your full-time job. For those that are looking to add public leadership to their journeys, is there any advice that you would give on kind of factors they should consider or either kind of some challenges you've either faced and obviously we're still in Black History Month too, so I don't want to shy away from some challenges that may have existed in that space as well, but just some factors that come into play that have for you when you've been making decisions on the public leadership side.
So for me, though, it's security and privacy. When you
Mm,
run for election, it
yeah,
is everything you have done that someone believes is going to be a negative, it comes up. And for me, it came up in my 2018 election. And prayerfully, I had a masterful woman on my campaign team who was my campaign manager, who was just basically like, "Breathe," right? It's not a false statement. And you're right. No, it's not. I'm not ashamed of what I've done, been through, it, what has happened to me. But I don't want people to think, "Oh, she's a judge. She has to be perfect." She's not perfect, right? I've lived the life. But so having had to file bankruptcy after a divorce.
mm,
And that was basically just to get rid of, well, to get rid of his debt, but to also make sure that I am on a payment plan for my debt, right? So it's easier for me to say, "Give me my debt and go away," than it is for me to fight about something. And so I was responsible in the fact that, yes, I filed, but I also filed so that I would restructure and pay it back. And so I want to be real clear, there was no free ride. Um, but
yeah,
the other thing is, I've been divorced. And so that's not something that people are like, "Ooh, look, it's a Christian that's been divorced." Yes, it's a Christian that's been divorced,
yeah,
right? Life happens. And so I think also being able to live into the authenticity of being through these systems is helpful. But it's also not something that I'll be embarrassed about. But the other issue is just security.
mm,
Um, as a judge, we have had threats, um,
I bet.
and so that's not unusual because as an ADA, we had threats. So I think it's part of being in the public life. And you never know. It's almost a little unnerving when people run into you in the public. You're like, "Hey, Judge so and so." And you're just kind of like, "How do you know me? Right? Is it a good thing?
Yeah.
Is it a bad thing? Do I need to find a deputy? Do I need to find somebody?"
Wow.
And I don't think everyone thinks of that, but we have had judges on our bench that have made unpopular decisions that have been reported in the news. And one of them, because we are in Fulton County, the courtrooms are open, and everyone's not going to be happy with all the decisions you make. But
Yeah.
our judge had a child that was in middle school, and the middle school child was bullied to the point where she thought of taking her life. And so it's at
Wow.
that point. He didn't come back to be with us this term. So our
Yeah.
judges sit for 4-year terms, but it's just something to think about when the public is saying, you're a bad person and your dad's a bad person, your mom's a bad person. You kind of really have to take time to secure your family, to make sure that they are grounded in their faith, that they know at the end of the day, like no matter what the people outside the world are doing, that you have done your absolute best to provide justice in a way that you believe is appropriate for the person before you, because it's really about how we treat those individuals each time they come before us.
Wow. Yeah, those are excellent points, but also we don't want to scare people. There are some positives to public service,
Oh,
hopefully,
absolutely,
in terms of
absolutely,
being rewarding and all the things.
absolutely.
But because you've been doing it for a very long time,
Right,
so there,
exactly. You can't
yeah.
scare me away.
But it's good to be prepared and it's good to know, especially with the family aspect and especially for women, that tends to be something that, again, not that men don't feel that same obligation to their family, but it's just a different type of consideration. So I greatly appreciate you mentioning those two things. So when you look at kind of your next steps, I mean, obviously, you'll hopefully be in that position for as long as you'd like to be, but do you have is there any kind of experience that you're still hoping to get or some additional like leadership space? I mean, I know you mentioned learning that you're excited to kind of see the next phase of.
So I am fortunate that I am in a couple of think tanks. One of them is through AEI, which gives me access. I'm sorry, American Enterprise Institute, which gives
Yeah.
me access to some child welfare policy. So I am grateful that I get to be able to. I'm not really in juvenile court anymore, but I get to be able to continue to explore that.
Okay.
And so I am really just looking to see where God will send me, but I am constantly available. I obviously have my work that I do outside. So my board service that I do gives me an opportunity to be fulfilling. I mentioned my sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I've also mentioned, or I haven't mentioned, some of the other boards that I'm on. One of them is about housing and education and how sustaining and maintaining housing helps with education, helps with health. And so being in part of those conversations is useful and helpful. And it helps me for a bit, but I know that God has a plan for me and I'm just going to ride along until he tells me what it is.
I like that. I feel like that should be like on my wall somewhere, which I think is it's helpful. It's helpful to keep in mind. So we're wrapping up here, but I just so appreciate your time and your advice and your insights. And one last kind of question for you, which I feel like is just we have to do it. We have to ask. But if you could give any piece of advice for the women that are watching that are interested in public leadership, what would that be?
So I would say learn to serve, learn the job, learn who you are, who you hope to be, but more importantly, learn to brag. I think as women, we don't do a very good job of bragging. I have been on interview committees where men have said, I am the X, Y, and Z, and I do A, B, and C. And then when I ask the woman behind that role exactly what happened, she's like, that's not what happened. Like, that's not what happened at all.
Yeah.
But the point is, women, we don't brag enough. And I think for me, I'm of a generation where I think bragging is a little like it's almost unseemly. Like you
Yeah.
don't want to be the person going, "Oh, aren't you wonderful? Aren't you great?" But at the same time, if you don't do it, no one else will know about it. And
Right.
worse, someone else may try to take um, your work product as theirs.
Hmm. Yep. So true. I like that. Learn to brag. I like that. Well, good. Well, thank you so much. And again, for those that are watching, my name is Larissa Martinez, and I'm the president and founder of Women's Public Leadership Network. And we are a nonprofit that is working to get more women into public office at all levels, appointed, elected. Also, we have judicial on there. So again, hope that you follow us, stay engaged. But thank you so much, Judge Kirk, for your time and for all of your advice and experience. We so appreciate you being in the position you're in, and again, being that leader that is helping lift up others behind her. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.